back 75 years in which this spot is supposed to commemorate. It's probably a little different. Probably 75 years ago we had buggies all up and down here, but glad to see you out today. There are a few thanks I'd like to make. I heard somebody say before I came up here, the Gettysburg address only took 3 minutes, so I'll try and get this in 2 minutes. First I want to thank Rod Homer. He kind of railroaded this and put it all together, and with the conjunction of the PLANO 4-H Club, and we do thank him because when we can commemorate any historical site or event, I think it's good in our community. And as you go around the country, I know you enjoy stopping in and seeing a particular commemoration, and it gives you a chance to think what happened here before, and I think it's nice. And for the Davies that deeded this portion of their property to the Historical Society to have this monument placed. And Don Witt, when we go back in, he prepared the granite that was put into making this monument. And Harold Scott for the work he did in preparing the plaque. Merle Harp from the Parks Association is always a help in preparing for anything of this sort and throughout the county and from our Park Service. And the other notations you have on your program, your Porterville Monument Works and your bronze works from Fresno. But I'm not going to take any more time. It is nice to have you out today, and again want to thank Rod for the program that he's prepared for you today. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Our first speaker is the president of the Tulare County Bicentennial Commission. The first speaker will be speaking on my home in Plano. He is a resident pioneer, and he is the one that gave this land so that we can have the monument dedicated. Mr. Bill Hayden.
I don't exactly know why I should be talking here, because we just happen to have this particular piece. Anyway, the place where you are, or at least where we are up here, is or was and supposed to be the center, the cultural and civic center of the old town of Plano. I don't think it ever got very far, but anyway, it was supposed to be the center. There's a portion in here, approximately 5 acres, that was reserved from the original town site. It was not cut up into lots as everything else around here was. It was kept by a Mrs. Miles, who was, I believe, the bankroller of the original town site of Plano. Anyway, right about, well, where our corner of our house is here was a house that had been there for a long time. The Williamsons lived there. Mrs. Miles' house was about where the carport, a little bit the other side of it, was out there. Any of you that see or seen the pictures, or I presume we may see them today, of these, that'll give you a little idea as to where we are. This then is the, supposedly at least, was to be the civic center of it. We had a chance to acquire this. The Mrs. Miles, who originally owned this whole thing, when she got elderly, Mrs. Williamson, from the stories I hear, she would take care of anybody that needed it. Anyway, she took care of Mrs. Miles, and in time fell heir to this piece of property. It was sold to a great uncle and aunt of mine, the Pierces, in somewhere about 1920, I don't know exactly. And then when they got very old, we bought most of it and then cleared up the rest of it after their death. Anyway, so we came back in here. My family didn't belong right here. Up around the corner a little ways, the Starkey place. It's the last house on the public road anyway, up east of where the elementary, the Vandalia School, used to be. Now it's the A&A trailer court. Anyway, if you go clear up there to the right, that was the old Starkey homestead. we are very, very happy to have this. I think it is in the center of the old town site. We're very happy to have it on in the middle of what we hope someday, if we ever get it done, will be our garden. As you can see, it's a long ways from done. We will get it sometime, and I think this will have a little bit better setting than the place where you're sitting now. We hope, if time, money, and so on carry on, to have this blacktop and have a place in here so you can drive in and read the marker from a car. We've kind of appropriated a little bit of it today for seating room. The blocks that are out there now to keep people from driving in will be removed. If you want to get another look at it, come on, drive in. Everybody else does. It's a good turning around place. Okay, well anyway, you'll find out a lot more about the old town here. There are several people here that do remember a lot more about it than I do. Of course, I like to think of myself as a latecomer. I'm afraid it's not as late as it ought to be, but anyhow, compared to some of the others. My mother, Mrs. Davies, over here in the blue dress, was born here in Plano before I was a little while, and she, and I think Ann, you don't see her, but Angie's supposed to be here somewhere. And sometime, if they show up, another couple that have been were here a good many years ago. I can't call them old timers. You don't do that to ladies. Anyway, they were here sometime ago. It's the Mrs. Williams, who is, let's see, her mother was one of the Creeks family. They were old timers up here on top of the hill also. There are various others around. If you're not already acquainted with them, you'll have plenty of chance to, I think, at the get together later. No sense in my taking any more time. Thank you.
Thank you for your information on Plano, and thank you for giving this land. The next speaker is speaking on landmarks of Plano. He is the chairman of the Tulare County Bicentennial Commission, Mr. Rodney.
Hi everybody, I'm real happy that all of you came. I again think of myself as a relative newcomer because Plano looked just like this ever since I can remember. And we're going to have to go back a generation or more for those who remembered it those days. Although since 5 generations of my family have lived here in this community, I have kind of set about to find out as much as I can about Plano. And the more I read into the history of this community, the more surprised and pleased and astounded I am at what used to be here. And the fact that this was the 3rd largest trading center, 3rd largest community in Tulare County. It was the largest community out of the Visalia Farmersville district. There were a lot of people who lived here and who came here to trade. We know of at least 4 hotels that were here. The Russell Hotel was down here on the corner underneath where the umbrella trees are. The Thompson Hotel was up here on the hill where the eucalyptus trees are. The Kaler Hotel was across the street, and the Scott Hotel was around the corner. That there were 2 or 3 grocery stores here. There were several, there was a livery stable across the way. There was a community hall down in this area. The light green building you see down here was the Justice Courthouse and was the store too, owned by the Russells and then the Gibbons and then the Williamsons. The Campbell Moreland Ditch that wrist runs by here is one of the oldest ditch companies in the San Joaquin Valley, taking water out of the Tule River sometime around 1862 by Mr. Campbell and Mr. Moreland, and they and the farmers in this area hand dug that, and the waters of that still runs. Why up here on where the orange grove is was a big granary. Across the street where the orange grove is were 2 churches, the only churches in the area, a Methodist church and next to that a Presbyterian church. Flanking on both sides of it was a manse for the Presbyterian church and a parsonage for the Methodist church. And the Methodists and the Presbyterians didn't get along too well, and this is one of the reasons they had 2 churches side by side. We're going to see a slide presentation. I'm going to show you pictures of these hotels. and of these churches and many of these things that you see. We're going to have this a little bit later when we go down to Vandalia School for refreshments. This was quite a community. There's a lot of people from Plano. There's not many people that live in Plano. Why did Porterville survive and why did Plano die? Plano was a good-sized town when there was practically nothing at Porterville, and heavens, the good people sure wouldn't go to Porterville. They all came to Plano. Why did Porterville survive and Plano die? That's a good question. But probably because Plano did not have a Porter Putnam like they had across on the north side of the river. Probably that was it. A lot of history. A lot of people lived here. A lot of good people. I don't think they cared if they had a town. They did have a town. But some people say, well, I'm sure glad it's all north of the river now and we don't have the problems they have. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, thank you all for coming. There is a lot here. We'll show you this in the slides.
Rodney, we have a member of the Williamson family here.
We're going.
Right here. Maybe we can get him to say something.
Dan, would you like to say something about landmarks? Of course, Dan was born here. We're going to hear from his sister in a few minutes.
Oh, I haven't much to say. I was born right over there where this part of the building is here. I always said I was born on a Plano ditch bank.
And here we are. Thanks very much, Dan.
Speaking on local bicentennial activities is the chairman of the Porterville American Revolution Bicentennial Commission, Mr. Buck Shaffer.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Porterville Bicentennial Committee and congratulate these kids, these 4-H kids, for the effort put forth in putting this monument here commemorating this very fine town, as Rodney says, of Plano. I know you have a tremendous heritage and we're very proud of you. My fervent hope is that when our country celebrates the tricentennial, that all of us living here today and all these little kids back here, we can do something in our time that'll make it worthwhile for the kids in the next 100 years to come and line up here and commemorate something that we have done. That's a challenge that we have. We want our country to survive and continue, and that's my fervent hope that the next 100 years will be so good that the little kids here will want to commemorate something that we have done. The bicentennial is built on the theme of kids like this. This is the reason we have the bicentennial, to continue our heritage in this country that we so much believe in. We want to remind you of a date next week, May the 30th. Rodney asked me to mention these dates to you. May the 30th, we are going to put a plaque in front of Porter Putnam's home, and this plaque, again, was donated by the young kids from Westfield School. We want to invite all of you to participate in that particular event. On June the 14th, there's going to be a Porterville Plaza flag raising ceremony on Flag Day on June the 14th in Porterville Plaza. We'd like to invite all of you to take part in that and also to attend. And the Bicentennial Committee has a meeting on the third Monday of every month. And we are not trying to tell anybody what to do in the Porterville area for the Bicentennial. We are inviting you to come to our meeting and present ideas to us. And anybody that has any idea they'd like to present to us for the Bicentennial, we would hope very much that you would come to the meeting, and anyone in this area certainly is most welcome. Thank you very kindly, and kids, the challenge, the next 100 years, we hope that people can come out in this free way of life that we have here and continue for our fourth 100 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shaffer, and thanks to the Porterville Bicentennial Commission. Our next speaker will speak on Plano memories. She was born and raised here. Mrs. Ellis Williamson Young.
Yeah, 80 years and 10. Anyway, I lost all my notes I had. They're buried someplace. But they took out part of now my mother told me that if I ever found a nickel or a penny rolling up that hill backwards, I could have it. But you know, there was such a hill. Look at that. See how they filled it? I've always remembered that. Mama said, I'd ask for a penny because there was that store with all that little cups of candy, or the licorice sticks, or and I'd want a piece of candy. Well, if I find a penny rolling up the hill backwards, you can have it. But I never found the penny. Well, our interests were in the churches and in our schools. You see those umbrella trees? There was a parsonage there. There was a big, tall church right there. Then there was a little vacancy, and then the other little church was right in there, and the parsonage was beside it. And then there was a store up on the Scott property, about where you see that white building there. That was down this side of town. There was, he said there was a liver stable there below the this is the Babcock house. And that was all vacant. Then there was a big barnyard there with a big barn on it. There was a store with a porch on it. They've torn the porch off and they widened the highway. They took that off. We fell in the ditch and we swam in the ditch. We drowned in the ditch. And we walked to Martin's Hill. Now that was something. There are holes in that rock where I could go and put my big toe, and I could see all over the world. You sit up there and the holes are still there, but I haven't got the wind to make it anymore. See, Judge Scott had a home back to this building over on the bank of the ditch. He was a postmaster in Porterville later. The first circus, the moving picture I ever saw was in a tent that was down on the corner there. It was a horrible thing, but it was a great event. Now, for some reason or other, there was a building on this side of the store building that used to be, well, we gave socials there. I don't know what we made the money for. Everybody worked. Anything was worth a nickel, believe me. I took my mother, made me a beautiful basket, and Grandpa Thompson, who had whiskers down here, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was waiting for some young boy to get mine. Well, it went for a few pennies, and he got mine. Now, that was my first heartbreak. Now, we didn't have service stations, but I remember on this side of the store, there was a little house, and we had a drum of kerosene and a drum of gasoline. And anybody happened to have a car or happened to want to fill their lamps up on Saturday, well, they came down and we filled their can up and gave them their oil. Then later on, there was a lumber yard on the corner, and Mr. Slinker's uncle worked there. And he's out in the crowd there someplace, I think. There he stands. Well, Troy, why are you turning your head there? I'm talking about, yeah. You didn't know your uncle worked there. He worked for Fred Kessing in the lumber yard. Yeah. Fred Kessing had the big shop on the corner, which was later taken over by the Walt Disney, and so dear to my heart. And there were many things in there that were used in the pictures that were taken up at below the
Cottonwood,
where the Cottonwood Dance Hall used to be up there. I'm getting awful old when I think about this. Eucalyptus trees were there. Those, Irwin Gibson lived up there with his mother and father and family. His father died while they were there. There used to be a cactus bush over there that we would go and try to get one of those prickly pears off and come home with slivers in our fingers. And we didn't learn to burn them off early enough. They were just full of seeds. Then we had, along the ditch here were great big orange trees. They weren't much good to eat, but they tasted awful good. There was grapefruit. I don't know why they took all those things out, but they did. Then there's a Rodney standing about where his grandfather drilled my father a well. And we had a great tall windmill up there, and I got up there and sat on that. I don't suppose any higher than that tree, but I thought I was at the top of the world. And I could look all over the country from that. Now Martha and Emma, she's standing over there. We had a path going right through our orchard. My father raised the best watermelons you ever saw. How we ever put up with it. Our house, I want to tell you about our house. It had a porch on it. It was about this wide. 3 feet, 5 feet, anyway, 6 feet. And every kid in the neighborhood that had a roller skate was on our front porch. What woman would put up with a bunch of kids roller skating the paint off of that porch? I don't know that ever was paint. But anyway, we had a lot of kids. Now, my nephew, Billy, he has bought this property here, and he lives in an old scout home. They destroyed that and built a new home. The lease built a new home. And just beyond that was the creeks, and down the lane from that was the halls and the camels. They were old timers here. And just beyond that was the Starkeys and the creeks and Peter Ting up that road. What else do you want to know? Oh, well, by golly, I never saw a drop of liquor until I've forgotten how old it was. I'll tell you about the Indians. I was scared to death of them. Now, we had 5 cows out here, and we got 5 cents a quart for our milk. And every other night, we would take 2 quarts up to Dr. Breen, who lived at the top of the hill, and the Hutchisons, who worked for them, lived on this road, way at the foot of their orchard there. Well, we didn't know which was safest, to go up the hill where the Indians rode horseback, or to go up past the cemetery. And I have watched that road and watched for those, because Indians were, they were scared to death of them. Because they stopped at the Fodnauer place down here and got their last jug of wine, just on the other side of the bridge. And when I'd see that horse turn this corner, under that fence I would go and hide out in the orange orchard. Now, if he wanted to get me, he'd have got me, sure. But anyway, that was just after that. I think the reason we were so frightened was just a short time before that the Indians had massacred that family that lived right up there by the state hospital. That's where that took. But let me see, what else will I tell them, Martha? Can you think of anything? They're all baking. I guess I better let you go, and I can talk a week on what things I've done. We had a fence around us. We could walk around that fence on our toes by hanging on to the eucalyptus and the pepper boughs. That was good. We had 2, one was his and one was hers out in the back. This is that. And we had our little gardens out there. Oh, thank you. These are the 2 pioneers of this community. Last night, about 24 acres or so from the Plano Club came and planted these plants. They were donated by the club. And to tell you about this is the charter president of Plano 4-H, Brent Stratton.
On behalf of the Plano 4-H Club and the Community Pride activities we have in the club, this is probably our first one as a whole group that we have done. And I'd like to donate these flowers, shrubs, and the upkeep on them if they die or whatever. And for the monument. I've seen some monuments around the county, and I haven't seen one with, the brick in the front and all the sort of work Mr. Davies has done on this. I really think it's really going to turn out nice when they finish it off. my forefathers, probably everybody else is here, have lived here for so many years, and I think it's a great honor that they recognize the town of Plano here. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. And a special thanks to the Tulare County Historical Society. They provided most of the money and the time so that we could have the monument. Without them, it wouldn't be up today. After the unveiling, we are going to adjourn to Vandalia Cafeteria. It's just down the road and the second turn. We'll have refreshments there. There'll be a short meeting with the Tulare County Historical Society, and Mr. Homer will show some films or some slides on Plano. But now the unveiling. Would all the 4-Hers step forward and get a hold of a piece of the cloth?
Don't pull. Don't pull. Careful where you step.
Don't get on the plant. Somebody step on the plant.
Let me stand on your shoulders, Bill. You want right here?
Some of you move around this way if you would like to be more in the picture. Careful where you step. And then all of you are going to go back this way with it. You're going to go back this way with it. Careful what you step on. Yeah, you get in there and get hold of that.
Oh, they said dog too. That's a dog.
Get in here, Bill. Bill, come on in.
The dog isn't that cute with a dog.
Now.
What are they waiting for a signal?
Kind of bring it up over there.
Careful where you step.
Watch your step. Yeah, I think so.
We will now adjourn to Vandalia Cafeteria.
Let's get you and the former president in here too.
People gathered, they had cultural groups, they had lots of picnics, and they even went swimming together. But to know something about Plano, we think it's dead. There still is a Plano. It's still used. The word's there. You have to look kind of close sometimes to see it, but it's still there, and especially in the Plano Road. But Plano, history of it is concerning this road here, which we now know as Plano Road, and this was the old Butterfield stage line. John Butterfield and James Birch got the idea of having a road all the way from the end of the railroad at Tipton, Missouri, or Little Rock, coming to San Francisco. They took the southern route. And this southern route so that it could be used all the year round. They wouldn't have to worry about the snows of the Rockies. And that this stage line would bring mail to the new state of California. This Butterfield stage line is what we now know of as Plano Road. And because that John Butterfield put his stage there, this is why the town of Plano began. And the Butterfield stage line operated and ran between 1858 and 1861. It was very short-lived, only lasted 3 years, primarily because of the Civil War, and the Confederates kept the Butterfield stage from running during the Civil War time. One of these stage stops was put on the north side of the Tule, where Porterville was later formed, and it made a big crook in it to turn towards the Tule River Indian Reservation. Because the Indians were here, this was a source of people, it was a source of sale, it was a source of labor, it was a source of women. It was for the early pioneers, Plano Road became the major travel route through the state of California. At that time, the first community to locate here was the community of Vandalia. And the community of Vandalia was located about where Vandalia Avenue is today. There were two groups that came here. The Vandalia colony was started by a wagon train of people who came from Vandalia, Illinois in 1859. They followed the Butterfield stage route and they settled on this island where we are now, about a half a mile to the north of us. And they settled there in 1859, and they were there until 1862. when the flood came. When the flood just about washed them away, and then in 1868 it did wash them away, and those people had to go either north of the river and join Porterstown, or they had to go south of the river to join the Plano people. And you see the island here in the center, with Porterville on the north side, and Plano on the south side, with the island in between. And we're right in the middle of that island where we sit here at this school right now. This island was located right here. It had a south channel that ran next to Martin Hill down through this area, and then the north channel was over here along where the Tule River is today. And in fact, that's where we are. That's before the college was put in. The Civil War started in 1861, and they were a group of people who were living in Texas who were Unionists. They were strong Presbyterians. They were Unionists. They did not believe in the Confederacy, and the Confederates said you have three choices. You can either join us, you can leave, or you can die. Well, it was just about as close to come west to California as it was to go back east, and so they decided to follow the Butterfield stage line west to California. And the further they came west, the worse the country got to looking, especially as they come across the desert. And the women made the men promise that the first decent place they came to, they'd stop. And the first decent place they came to was at the Tule River crossing, and this is at Tule River, and this is where they stopped. When they came into it, this is what the country looked like. Broad plains, oak-covered, in the river bottom. You see Martin Hill there in the distance. And this is the way Tule River looked at the time these first people from Texas, these Presbyterians from Texas came. And they said if you stood upon the hills, you could look clear over the plain. And someone said that they said, oh, what a plain. So they called it Plano. Some people say that part of the group came from the town called Eau Plaine, Illinois. I don't know whether this is true or not. Jay Brown used to tell the story that these people were so straight-laced, they believed in no drinking and no gambling and no dancing, and they believed in playing no cards and playing no this and playing no that, and so that's what they named it. You'll have to ask Jay Brown. But anyway, when these people came into this area, they were farmers, they couldn't care less about a town, they wanted to live good, Christian, happy lives. They divided the country up into small farms. They went into the cattle business. They went into the grain business. And later, after water came in, they went into the citrus business. And these were farming type people. Now this to talk about the saloons. This is an article in the 1889 paper. That's the same year that Porter Putnam died, by the way. Abe Bowen has given up the Russell Hotel in Plano and gone back to Porterville. Remember the Russell Hotel was on the corner of what is now Worth and Plano. And he goes into partnership with Tom Simmons. Abe's departure leaves Plano with only one saloon now. There were formerly three. But it's evident the liquor business is not a pronounced success in Plano. So they were not drinking people. This is a picture of David Campbell and with his daughter Jane, and Jane later on married John Lloyd, the Indian agent, and she's the mother of the Lloyd family of Porterville. But anyway, David Campbell, along with Mr. Moreland, had dug the Campbell-Moreland ditch. And we just dedicated the monument on the banks of the Campbell-Moreland ditch, and digging a ditch this way is the hard way. But this ditch certainly supplies a lot of water. It did in the early days so that citrus could be grown in the area, and it certainly supplies water still today, as we saw. When Porterville and the Pioneer Land Company decided that they were going to take all the water from the Tule River, this made the people of Plano so mad that every man in Plano went over to the Pioneer Land Company's office over in Porterville and demanded they get their water back. And the president of the Pioneer Water Company laughed at him, says, if you want it, you know where it is, you come and get it. And the Plano people says, well, we're going to go up and take our water back. So the people of the Pioneer Land Company, who owned all the land up on the north side of Porterville, they hired the meanest, roughest guy they could think of. That was Jim McKinney, the outlaw. And they hired Jim McKinney to go up there and guard it. Well, the people of Plano, they weren't going to be bluffed by that. They also, by the way, Jim McKinney's written up in Shotguns on Sunday if you want to read the story. And they hired Reese Martin, who was Reese was a pretty mean hombre himself, I understand. And he was the son of, or he lived right underneath that oak tree. In fact, I understand he was so mean that his sons finally killed him. And they said he was one mean guy. And anyway, he run old Jim McKinney off. And this is one of the Martins of Martin Hill. But anyway, because of the water, this is what gave the beautiful orange groves to the Plano area. Now, we're getting away from our story of Plano and what developed and what was located there. This is a long article concerning the story of Plano. It tells about where it's located, it tells about the Presbyterian Church, it tells about the Russell brothers coming in, putting their store and their hotel, and it tells about the Presbyterian Church. Mr. Thompson talked about the post office, the McKelveys, and you'll see them a little bit later, telling about the story of bringing in water and the Indian agents and the Presbyterian Church and some of the various people, but I'm not going to take time to read that. If you want to, some of the history books of the area tell about this story of Plano. Andy Mitchell says that the name was given officially about 1870 by the postmaster at that time, and she says the meaning of the name has not been determined. Well, I think it's been determined, but there's many stories you can make it fixed. It says there the first home was David Campbell's, and this David Campbell's home was located where the college is today. It says the first door is Mr. Thompson. You heard Ellis talk about Mr. Thompson with a long white beard. We're going to see him. The first church was the Presbyterian. Well, that depends. It was built by the Presbyterians, but the Methodists took it away from them. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. First school was the Tule River. First newspaper done. This is Mr. Thompson in his store. It certainly doesn't look like Safeway of today. But if you went to the store, Mr. Thompson's store, this is the way it looked. And there he is out in front with his favorite buggy. Wife all got dolled up, even carrying, but has to put a broom in her hand to show that she's industrious. Got the favorite cow, got it out in front of the picture too. Got the hired man, he didn't get him dressed up, but at least they got him to take his hat off. And so there's the picture of the Thompson store. It doesn't look much like our modern stores of today. And Mr. Thompson, he ran the post office, and he was the commission agent, and he dealt with groceries, fruits, cigars, candies, medicine, etc. Probably more etc. than anything else. You notice that even in June of 1881, there were still people doing trapping for hides and belts up in the hills, and they'd bring their hides down and they'd sell them to him for groceries. Here's another picture of Mr. Thompson leading his favorite mule. And that's the Thompson store. Mr. Thompson then went into the hotel business, and here's the artist's conception of what the hotel looked like. By the way, if you'll notice up in the corner of the picture, there's a small picture of the church, and we're going to be talking, and I'll be showing you more on that church a little bit later. This is what the artist says that Thompson's hotel looked like, but this is actually what it looked like. Those trees, those three trees out in front that you see there are eucalyptus trees that he just planted. And you can see them a little bit better there. And you can see those eucalyptus trees still growing there in Plano where the Thompson Hotel was. And this is where they said Irvin Gibson grew up as a boy. Another store was the Russell store. The Russell, this is a picture of the artist's conception of the Russell store in 1892, and that building still stands. You're going to see that building, one of the few old buildings of Plano that's still standing. Besides the Russell Brothers store, the Russell Brothers also had a hotel that was down here under these two umbrella trees. Later on, the Russells sold their store to Ocean Gibbons, and this is a picture of him. This was the store, this was the meeting house, this was the post office, this was the Justice Courthouse, this was the community building of Plano at that time. Here's another picture of Mr. Gibbons. I'm going to go back one. You notice the two umbrella trees. Later on, the Russells sold their store to Ocean Gibbons, and this is a picture of him. This was the store, this was the meeting house, this was the post office, this was the Justice Courthouse, this was the community building of Plano at that time. Here's another picture of Mr. Gibbons. I'm going to go back one. You You notice that the front of the store there up in here is nice and smooth. You can tell the age because they must have had a possum up there because they had to cut a hole up there to get in to get the possum out. But in the next picture, you notice that the board's gone, so they just gave up on it then. Here it is a little bit later, just a big gap. That way the possum can come in and out whenever he wants to. And then the Hush and Gibbons sold this to the Williamsons, and they took over the store. I always wondered how they repainted that and didn't put the plug back in. They didn't paint the letters. Anyway, there's the Williamson store. Mr. Williamson was quite a man. We've heard from his granddaughter and grandson here, Dan and Ellis. And that besides running the store, they, by the way, that's the store building there. That's the old Russell store. That's the Hush and Gibbons store, and that's the Williamson store right there, that blue one. And up here on the hill where we had our dedication, that's where the Williamsons lived. And this is a picture of old Mr. Williamson. Now, he doesn't look like the Bat Mastersons or the White Earps of television fame, but he was the justice of the peace. He was the law, and he's the one that you, if something went wrong, he's the one that you went to. This is his obituary notice, and you can tell by that. I wish we had time to read it, because some of these old pioneers were fine, fine people, and we ought to do more knowing something about their lives. Anyway, he lived
right there. That was my grandfather.
Right.
Okay, he never had anything to do with the store. He was Judge in town.
Oh, he doesn't. Well, then I got this wrong. Then, well. Oh, G.A. Williamson was your grandfather.
My grandfather. He was Judge Williamson.
And W.H. Williamson was your father.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for correcting me. But anyway, he was the lawman of the area. And Dan Williamson is what? The third generation of constables and justices of the peace in the Porterville area. Anyway, their home was up above the Campbell Morning Ditch, up in this area. Right in this side here, Bill, you can see what your house was, the place where your house was. You can see how much higher. Bill said that where we put this stone, that he took 6 feet of that earth away, 6 feet of that hill away to put his house there. And you can see how high that was from the road just a couple of years ago. There is no known picture of the Williamson home, but this is an artist's drawing of the Williamson home that Bill Williamson gave me, and I appreciate that. This is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Williamson. This is W.H. Williamson. Is that right? Okay. Right. Okay. There they are, and there's your mother with the children, and those are the children. Well, this is Ella here, and this is Dan, and they're with us today. Oh, you haven't changed a bit. And this is Ivan Williamson with their brother, who was dressed up for the centennial of 1961, and he continued to live there. And this is his son, Bill Williamson, who continues the Williamsons on, living in the Plano area. Now, as we said, their home was right across the Campbell Moreland Ditch, right up here in this area. And now that this is the white home built there, and I don't have a picture of your home, so I'll have to get this. What's that? There, yeah. Right, okay. And this is where we put the monument. You can see how much soil that was taken off that little hill there. And this would be located right about in here, right about in this district. Right in the corner of Civic Center, Plano. Now, we talked about the churches. Remember, the people of Vandalia were strong Methodists. The people of Plano were strong Presbyterians. And they met in homes for a number of years, and finally they decided that they would build a church building. And they built this church building here and had a big dedication. And when they got ready to dedicate it, someone said, well, let's vote to see what kind of a church we're going to have. And when they had the election, by golly, the Methodists won. The Presbyterians built the church, and they lost the church. And that didn't matter. Not they wouldn't go to church with the Methodists, so they went into town. And this is their preacher, and they went into town and they built this church in there, the Presbyterians did. They joined with the Porterville Presbyterians. The only thing is, after they got the church built, they again had an election on what kind of a deal. A lot of railroad people came in who were Congregationalists, and they voted to make it Congregationalist. And here's the second church that the Presbyterians built, and they didn't even get that. The Congregationalists took away from it. And that's the oldest church in Porterville still today. So then they were mad, and they decided to go back to Plano and build another church right next to the Methodist church. And that's why the two were there, just to show them spite. And they built as pretty a church as they could build. They built this church. This is what the artist's conception of it is, but this is what it actually looked like. And there's Mr. Thompson out there in his favorite buggy and wagon out in front of the church. He figured he did so much work on it that he ought to have his picture in it. And if you'll notice, there's a few pepper trees out there in front, and then next to it, you just see the chimney of it is of the manse, of the Presbyterian manse. And we're going to see a picture of this Presbyterian manse in just a minute. These are those same pepper trees that are out in front. This is one of the church. This is one of the Sunday school groups here. And here's Ella Young standing right here, and here's Martha Stratton next to her, and here's my mother right on here. Edgar Prestige right there on the with the hat on. Now this is Mr. Williamson standing in front of the Presbyterian manse, which was directly across the road from his house. Now that manse, like so many of the buildings of Plano, later on when Porterville got bigger than Plano, was moved to Porterville, and it's still over to Porterville today, and here it sits. And this is now the former home of Mrs. Ida Steiner, which is right across the street from Copeland Lumber Company, right down the road from Daybell's. And that's the old Presbyterian manse in there. Ethel Prestige told me that she was born in the upstairs of that house. And then the Methodists, they couldn't live up to the Presbyterians because the Presbyterian had such a big, beautiful church. So they said, the mud come out of the stone and the chimney fell down. So instead of putting it back up, they just closed up the hole. Notice old Mr. Thompson, he came across the street, left his hotel to go and get his picture with the Gator Hotel. He loved to have his picture taken. That's quite a staircase elevator there to get up to the where the people slept. This is the way that house looks today. Speaking of hotels, this is the Scott Hotel. Another picture of the Scott Hotel. Mrs. Scott married was the wife of Mr. King. And the Scott Hotel was up Gibbons, up this road here, where the Bill Williamson home is today. The Leaches lived there in times past, and what is that girl with? Catherine Leach. Yes. Yes, he did. I have a picture of it, but I didn't include that with it. Probably should have. Now, another thing Plano was known for, if you remember the statement up there, it says that this is where the orange trees were first planted. The Gibbonses planted them. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about this. This is Mr. and Mrs. Demi Gibbons, who certainly, from everything I read, were just the finest people. And they were some of the early people here. They came with the first group into Plano. And this is Mr. Gibbons' poll tax receipt of 1862. So this shows that he got here in the early days, and also notice that he paid $3 so he could vote. He built this home in 1863, which makes this the oldest two-story house still standing in Tulare County, and the second oldest house still standing in Tulare County. Anyway, this is what the artist said it looked like, but this is actually what it looked like. There's Mr. Gibbons out there in front, part of his family up in the house, and the two twin girls up there in the upper window. This is the way the house looks today. This is a piece of newspaper that came off the wall. You can see how old it is. Here's a picture of Mr. Gibbons in later life, and Gibbons Peak, and Gibbons Meadow, and Gibbons Road. A number of things were named after him. A fine, fine gentleman. He owned a lot of land. He owned the land all the way from what is now the trailer court clear over to out to the Catholic cemetery. When he got there, of course, in '61, before the Homestead Act, and when he wanted to homestead his place, they said, well, you can only homestead 160 acres. And he said, well, I got a lot more than 160 acres. And they said, well, since it's you, we'll give you 320. So he homesteaded all of this land from up here at where the A&A trailer court is now. All this area in through here was all belonged to the Gibbonses, different parts of it. This little square right here is where my house is. This is a biography of Mr. Gibbons. Again, I would like to go through it with you, but it's too long, but he was a tremendous individual, had a great life. Goes on to the next page, too. And here, Mrs. Gibbons was one of the ladies that planted the first orange tree. And in this picture here, this tree you see here in front was the first orange tree planted in Tulare County. My grandfather later cut the tree down so he could build a front porch onto the house. At that time, the Civil War was raging in the east, and federal troops were stationed at Fort Babbitt over at Visalia. And on the 4th of July, 1863, there were oranges given to every adult who came. Mrs. Gibbons decided to take the seeds out of her orange. These were the old Hawaiian sweet orange. And to take the seeds out of the orange and take them home and plant them and see whether they'd grow. And they did. And this is a story about J. Brown telling about his grandmother planting the first orange trees. And the first generation from these were taken out and planted in the orchard. And these trees are still out there, and they're still growing, and they're still doing fine. And those trees there were planted in 1869. I don't know who that guy is, but anyway, he's telling about the fact that those trees are still there, and now, as you can see, it's been 106 years ago since those trees were planted. And this all took place here on the Gibbons property. And from this, then, the trees spread all over this area, and many of these trees were used as rootstock when the later navel came into use. The Gibbonses are buried out at the Vandalia Cemetery. Because of the citrus industry, this is why this packing house was started, which was one of the first packing houses in the area. I sure wish I could get a picture of that packing house at the time it was being used. But this is the way it sits today, and this is known as the old Ponca Packing House by the Vandalia Packing Association. And the Ponca Packing House was named because this is what the railroad named that siding, the Ponca siding. And this is the first train into Plano, which Mr. Myers was telling me probably had as much to do with Plano going down as anything else, because the railroad didn't come to Plano, it did come to Porterville. Plano people thought it would bring riffraff and trouble and saloons and all those bad sort of things, and they didn't want that, so they didn't have it come through. By the way, that train is sitting right across the street from White's Market. The Vandalia brand, again, of the Vandalia Packing Company, was by the Plano Packing House. And because of this, all of this interest in this area was formed. Here's Mr. and Mrs. Gibbons again with their son, Oshin. And his son, Oshin, he's the one that had the store in town. And this young lady over here married Clinton T. Brown. And this is she in later life with her family, with Mrs. Clinton T. Brown, and the little boy in the foreground is J. Brown. Clinton T. Brown had the big dairy in the area, and he supplied milk for all of this area. Here's his new truck taking milk into town. And this dairy was located right on the north side of Martin Hill. This is some of the old buildings in here before the Golden Hill Trailer Park took over that area. And these barns then were destroyed. This is a picture of J. Brown. Now, J. Brown lived where the college is now, where the Campbells first located, and this postcard says irrigating pasture land. That's no irrigation, that's a flood. This is when the south bank of the river was full, except they didn't want to admit that it flooded in Plano. That house then, when the college was built, was moved, and it sits here today on Gibbon Street. Here's a picture of Jay Brown, who became county supervisor from this district. This is a picture of the Clinton T. Brown home as it is today, and his grandniece, the Baird girl lives there, Susan, thank you. Then the Gibbonses left, and my grandfather, Ellie Prestige, bought the house, the old Gibbons house. As we said, he put the front porch on it. Ellie Prestige married Mattie Crooks, and he was a well driller. And he drilled many of the wells in this area, and Ella mentioned that he drilled the well there where the dedication, where the stone was put, and he built many of them in this area. Many of the orchards here, he drilled the well. He also had the Prestige Oil Company, which I thought was kind of interesting. It was only worth $10,000, and of that he only had 1,500 shares. He belonged to the Anti-Salute League on the school board. He also, like so many others, belonged to the Oddfellows. He was looking for a home for his growing family, and so he found it here in the old Gibbons place. Emma Prestige Jackson Stanion is here today, and so is Martha Scranton, and the little gal in the hat, Wanda McLaughlin. Is that a Bo? Big Bo, okay. This is a picture of the family. This is where they got the habit, and they just couldn't seem to get out of it. Every time they line up, they always have to line up on the rope. Not only that, but they still do. And Ellie Prestige lived there the rest of his life, and then Manny lived there after him. My mother was born in the house, grew up in the house, and was married in the house, and came back to live her life there. And grew a lot of flowers in the area. The place was well known for these back in the 40s and early 50s. And then they built themselves a new home over on the backside of the property where they live today. I went down to visit my grandparents, and then I grew up in the house. And this is a picture of the house when it was 100 years old in 1963. This is an artist's conception of the house. This is a historical society meeting that was held there a number of years ago. Maybe some of you people see your pictures there. And this is the way the house looks today. So counting with my great-grandparents, John and Eliza Crooks, with my grandparents, with my parents, and with my family, 5 generations of our family have lived there in that house. Just talking about houses, this is the Kessing home. Certainly they were the Mr. Bigs of the area. This is a long biography of Mr. Kessing, and again, I wish I had time to read this because he was quite a fellow. This is a picture of the Kessing home and the young palm trees out in front. This is the way it looked then. This is the way it looks today. This is the Luther home today. This is the backside of the Kessing home. The Kessings were quite high society people, and they owned the block clear between there and what we now know as Kessing's Corner. And on Kessing Corner is where that shop building was that Ella was talking about. And if you have homemade furniture that family lived here a long time, very possibly it was made in the Kessing shop. Now this building, as Ella said, was purchased by Walt Disney, and was used in the movie so dear to my heart. And I've heard two stories. One that afterwards he sold it to someone down in the Poplar area and is still down there today. And someone says that he took it down to his studios down at Burbank, Walt Disney Studios. Does anybody know where this building is today? Anyway, this is the Kessing shop. The Kessings had a big dairy too, and this is their big dairy barn. And this is Kessing. And the Kessings also had a brickyard. And this is a picture at the corner of Yates and Prospect. And this is Jeff Edwards holding one of the bricks. You can just walk out in that field and find lots of bricks still out there. And this is him holding one of the bricks that he and I found. Also, another family was the Hall family that lived here in Plano, back down in this area now. And the Hall girls, one of them married a Campbell, one of them married a Martin, and one of them married a Ditto. And this is a picture of old Mr. Hall and his grandchildren. And one of his granddaughters is Ethel Prestige, Ethel Martin Prestige. And she and Edgar are still going today. This is an old home. This is the Woodard home. And that building is still here in Plano. That's a postcard in 1908 that was sent. And that building looks like this today. This is the Captain Cash home. This is the Peter Ting residence. His obituary notice. I wish I had time to go through all of these. And this is young Peter Ting. Who's that, Wanda? With a bow on the head. And there she is. And she lived in Plano for a time. And she has Wanda's children where today. Right, Porterville. I used to there pretty early, didn't you? You were born at a young age, weren't you? And her sister, Martha and Russell Stratton, live on the north side of Martin Hill, which puts them pretty close to Plano. And Emma lives on the back side there, so she's a part of Plano still today. And 4 generations of her family, including the baby Marilyn Weldon now, 4 generations of that family have lived here in Plano. 5, I guess, their children. This is the Anderson home, or the Hinton home. This is loading down oranges. Take them to market. This is the way that place looks today. This is the Starkey residence, right after it was built. This is Bill Davies' grand. Oh, it wasn't built there. I see. Okay, so this is after it was the house was moved in. This is the house a little bit later. We'll get some landscaping up around it. This is Pete and Aggie LaValle, who used to live there, and this is the way the house looks today. This is the Will Ross home, and the way it looks today. This was the Russ Ross home. And the way it looked a little bit later after it had some beautiful palm trees in front of it. And this is the way it looks today. This is Mr. Meade. And Mr. and Mrs. Meade lived in the south end of Plano. And their son Jackson Meade and Muriel Meade. And their home is gone. It used to be located right there. Now this is a house that Jeff Edwards says belonged in Plano, and no one knows where it is. If any of you know where that house is, please tell me. This is another house in Plano that no one can identify. And here's another house. Must be the 4th of July, but anyway, no one knows where that house is either, here in the Plano area. Now, also another family living here was the Crooks family. And they had a lot of them. There were the Bastions here and here, Martins here, Austin Crooks, Shiplin home, the Gray home, the Prestige, Crooks, Shell. All of these people were all brothers and sister-in-laws of each other. Ina Steiner says they were the largest family in Porterville's history, and all of these people lived here in this area. Clara Matthews, Joe Bastian, Matty Crooks, Matty Prestige, Eliza Crooks, Lou Martin, Gamma Creeks Crooks, Hattie Wells, Leonine Wells, Zella Chiplet, Charles Crooks, and Eva Gray. And all of these were sisters and two brothers, all lived here, the same family, all in the Plano area. And they lived their lives out here in this area. And this is them in later years, Otto Bastian here and Gamma Crooks were the last of these to live. Yes? Creeks Crooks. And there were a lot of the Crookses in this area, and they would gather for many gatherings. This is the old matriarch, Eliza Rambo Crooks, and her home was right here in Plano. Then there was Austin Crooks, and he lived where the Corkins family lives now. And there was the Martin family, and many of you remember Georgia Roundtree. And this was their home, and their grandson George Roundtree lives there today. And this is the Shiflett family, and they live right here, right down from the Vandalia Cemetery. And this is a picture of their barn. Their house burnt, but it's located where Flying Wales is today. And this is Joe and Aunt Bastian. Picture of them when they were married. And this is a picture of them building fence, doing it the old way. Then there was Hattie and Ralph Wells. This is a picture of them on their 50th wedding anniversary, and they lived to see their 65th. And their home, as it is today, and it was lots of gatherings were held there. This is a wedding in front of their house. And Ben and Eva Gray. This picture of them in Pismo swimming. And this is the Gray home, and the way it looks today, the Holbrook home. This was Will and Nain Wells, and their home was on the west side of Plano, right there at the corner where the railroad track crosses. And by the way, that corner is the same one shown in this picture of Barney Oldfield going across that railroad track. He came through in 1913. And then Charles Crooks lived in this home. And Camma Crooks, she was in Creeks. And this is the Creeks family, the children. And this is the father, G.A. Creeks, and this is the Creeks home. Later on, Reverend Max Slaughter lived there. And they remodeled the home. And Mrs. Slaughter lived there until she passed away. And the house now has been taken down, and I think Bill Williamson owns that property. This is Beck Rambo. This was her home. And this is the way it looks today, the Lieberger home. We haven't even talked about Vandalia School. It was started in 1861, the oldest school out of the Bicentennial area. The first school was in the teacher's home. The second school was called the Clapboard School. After the floods, it was moved to the south side of the island, right what is now the corner of Worth and Plano, and that vacant lot there. This is where the third Vandalia School was. We do have a picture of it. This is it. This is the oldest known picture we have. And this picture was probably taken in about 1880. Then they moved up on the hill for the fourth one. This is the Vandalia School there, where the A&A trailer court is today. And this school was used until about 1913. These pictures here were taken in the 1890s. I wish we had time to go through them to see them a little closer for you. You do want to recognize Mr. Thompson. He never failed to have his picture taken. And a number of you who are here today are in these pictures, and I wish I could take time to show you. This, I did get a kick out of this picture. This picture I'm painting the Vandalia School. One standing on the chimney, one on the balcony, and one working. Then that school got too big, too many children for it. Had to have more than just upstairs and downstairs. Oh, this is Neva Porch Hastings, the school teacher. This is one of their school teachers. And Neva Porch Hastings this was her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Porch, who also lived here in Plano. Half of one more. This is one of the graduation classes with Mrs. Hastings in here, Jay Brown, Gamma. Right. Here's the graduation program from 1914. And you'll notice that Ella Williamson was one of the graduates along with Martha Prestige Cranton, who was here today.
Say 1914.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1912. Thank you for correcting me. Now we know how old you are. Ella graduated from grammar school in 1912. Here's then in 1914, the old school was torn down, and this school was put up. The beautiful brick building that a lot of us remember. And it was used from 1914 until the early 1950s. Wanda, how'd you get the picture again? This is the first class in the new school. And this is the first graduation class in the new school. Now this class of 1918, I've got a number of school classes here, and I wish we had time to take these. Most of these were taken in 1930. By the way, I was going to say Carolyn. I didn't think Carolyn Lowe got here. This is Miss Carolyn Chamberlain at that time. Now Carolyn Lowe, she's over here in the corner, and we're happy that she could get here. She has not been feeling well, and we're happy that she's here. Carolyn, that was 16 years ago, wasn't it? Yes, all the time. This is one of her classes, and the little girl in the center is my wife. These were taken in about 1940. Just some old school pictures. I wish we had time to see all of these. There's Carolyn.
That's cool. That looks like my time. That's cool.
There's Carolyn again. Mrs. Martin on the end.
I never did. I wasn't that athletic.
That picture of Vandalia School in 1945, I know that very well because I'm that fellow right there. I was in the big Bartlett band at that time. Then in the 1950s, early 50s, they moved back down into Vandalia, back on the island, and they built this new school where we are today. And Vandalia School goes on. Plano is still a citizen. The town of Plano is not as big or anything like it used to be. Plano has a lot of historical sites. We helped dedicate another of these sites today. Many memories are locked out in the Vandalia Cemetery of people who lived their lives and enjoyed it. And And the area of Plano is only now part of the greater Porterville area. We have a few old buildings left that remind us of those days. We have a lot of happiness with the modern generations that are here that have descended from those who came. But we're all Portervillians, we're all Tulare Countyans, we're all Americans now, and we can look back to our memories and wonder what it'll be like, as Buck says, at the next 100 years bicentennial of our countries. Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.